Welcome to Stories with Traction, unedited and unfiltered. These are real conversations with leaders who have walked through trials and triumph. In a world of AI-polished sound bites and scripted perfection, this podcast isn't about being flawless. It's about being purposeful. I'm your host, Matt Zahn. We're going to find out what drives these leaders, what's their story, and how can we learn from their experiences. Get inspired and enjoy Stories with Traction. Dave, welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here.
I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I know you're incredibly busy. I'm really excited about this conversation, Dave, just because I feel that you can offer a tremendous amount of value to my audience with different things that you've done over the years, different business leaders that you've worked with. But before we dive into that, I want everyone to understand a little bit about what you do. So the first question I have for you is, when you're at a networking event or a party and someone asks you, what do you do? What's your response to that question?
My general response is that I'm an executive advisor and situational sounding board for leadership teams. And more or less, clients hire me, and my clients are very similar to yours, $50 to $500 million companies, and they hire me to help them build self-directed teams. So I'm more or less a resource that they use to help them get their people to communicate with more confidence, to help them be better decision makers, problem solvers, negotiators with clients, anything to do with people relating to people. They leverage me for that stuff.
Situational sounding board.
Yeah,
I like that. So what are some of the situations that you've worked through with people?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I just started an ongoing workshop, and I call it Improv for Leaders, because it kind of dovetails into this situational based thing. At the end of the day, most of my clients on the leadership side are dealing with people problems or communication problems or attitude problems or motivational problems. And in the moment, they don't know how to deal with it, or they don't know what to say, how to initiate, how to get into the right conversation without shutting it down. So when I say situational, it can be very situational in that regard. Same thing on the sales side. So it's, how do I help a person interact with another person in an effective way? And a lot of that, if you do standard classes and workshops, it will come out. But when you give people the flexibility to kind of grab onto certain things, that's when I'm able to help them actually deal with what's really going on. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very specific.
Absolutely. So you mentioned improv for leaders. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So I did improv comedy for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
I tied into comedy sports. So for people that aren't familiar that are listening, so there's an outfit out in Chicago called Second City. A lot of your SNL individuals have come from Second City, and then there was a spinoff, Comedy Sports. There's a Comedy Sports in a lot of major cities across the U.S. So I tied into them for 4 years, and then I had a traveling. It was a group in southeastern Pennsylvania, actually called Better Than Bacon, that I was a part of for about a year and a half. This is right before COVID, and then COVID happened, and then with in-person events being shut down, I transitioned and went a different way. But I found improv invaluable, right? And I've done a lot of talks over the years. I don't think anything prepared me for what I do today, speaking wise, more than improv comedy. And I'm not the funniest person, right? And I think there's a lot of misconceptions in business where, oh, you have to be funny. But from a business perspective, there are different classes, there are different workshops business leaders can go through that they learn the fundamentals of improv. And it is unbelievably helpful, especially for leaders that are doing staff meetings regularly, or maybe they're standing up and they're doing like a town hall type event for their company. So give us a little bit of the lay of the land with what you do regarding improv for leaders.
So it's so funny. I have no formal improv training. It's so interesting. My wife keeps trying to sign me up for this thing in Boston, which I will do, by the way. But the fundamentals of it, for me, and if I understand it correctly, is the whole concept is based on yes and not shutting down a conversation or an idea or a flow. And so when it comes to leadership, it's helping the manager, whether they're an entry-level manager or a C-level executive, create an opportunity for a conversation to continue. It could be an idea generation conversation or a difficult conversation. And I think that's where most of the clients that hire me struggle, is what to say and do in the moment to keep another person open, whether to have a really tough engagement or a brainstorming engagement, like I said before. And that to me is what improv is keeping the conversation going in a productive way that involves all parties. And so that's the point of the workshop, where we come in with a general topic and then we work through the basics of that topic. And then through that, specific examples get dumped on the table and we work through them. So that's the whole point of that. And the same thing on the sales side. It's really no different. How do I help somebody execute a conversation in the moment when things feel difficult, when they're on their heels? How do you not feel on your heels? How do you feel entitled to ask the tough question?
Absolutely. No, that's key. For you personally, Dave, I recommend checking out Comedy Sports in Boston. They actually have an outfit out in the Boston area.
Okay.
Comedy Sports, Z on the end. Comedy Sports, awesome.
Okay.
So much fun. One of the things I think is really important for business leaders to recognize, because I really do feel like there's a difference between innovation and creativity, right? So innovation can be very process driven, very systematic, and everyone wants to innovate for their clients, right? No business says, oh, we need to be less innovative. No one says that. Everyone wants to be more innovative. But it's very rare we talk about internal creativity, right? That, like what you're talking about, this spur of ideas, getting tons of ideas on the table and then kind of working through them. And it is interesting because when we think about certain musicians, and you can throw, I'm really into like different lyrics, right? So musicians, not only it's sounding good, but deeper meaning. So we can put, a Bob Dylan into that category, or even like a Frank Sinatra, like sound good, but also like if you peel back layers of the lyrics, there could be deeper meaning. And what's interesting about the two artists that I mentioned, if you look into the sheer volume of songs that they had, way more than the songs that we recognize, right? Almost 10 times the amount. And I think a lot of times, especially when we're talking about like a C-suite executive, sometimes they feel like, oh, I need like 3 ideas and I'm going to be able to find one that works. Well, no, you might need to go through tons and tons and tons of idea generation to pin down something that works. So can you speak a little bit more about that regarding the creative process and trying to whether it's storyboarding or whether it's using note cards. There's a lot of different strategies people can implement to try to get ideas out. But talk a little bit about your creative process.
Well, a lot of it starts with me alone with nobody. And a lot of it starts with me writing every day. So before I even sit in front of a client or speak in front of a client or coach a client, I'm going through this same process. And I've been writing for probably 12 years consistently on a daily basis. So if I have an idea or a thought or an observation or an encounter with somebody that was interesting to me, I write it down. And then I sit on it, or I'll revisit it and try to make sense of why I wrote it down. Why did I write that down? What was interesting about it? Why do I think that's relevant? How does that tie into a client engagement or this individual over here that I coach? So I practice that so it naturally comes out when I'm in a room or one-on-one with anybody. And I think when it comes to creativity, there are no, like, you establish some sort of boundaries. Like we're not gonna get off track. And if we're here to talk about leadership, we're not gonna talk about water filtration, for example. We're gonna like establish some parameters for the conversation, but everything within those parameters is legal. Like there are no bad ideas. There are no boring ideas. There's no generic ideas. There's nothing outlandish, as long as it falls within those buckets. And it's just, let's just take the top off and let's talk about what might be possible, even if it's not. And then we can gradually go back and look at it and say, of these, which ones do we think are the best? And which ones should we table for now? And so a lot of it just starts with, let's just not put any limits. And let's just have an open discussion. So that's where a lot of my ideas come from. There are times where I'll get up in the morning and my wife will come downstairs and I'm already writing, and she'll usually say, "What's going on? I'm like, "Yeah, I'm right." And she's like, what are you writing about? And usually she doesn't want to hear, but on the days where she wants to, I'll say, I just wrote, 10 lines on this. What does that mean to you? What do you think I'm trying to say here? And because I sometimes don't know what I'm trying to say. And usually when I'm with a client, and I don't want to go too far on a tangent, sometimes they don't know what they want to say. A lot of them think they need to know, or they need to impart this idea or these 3 bullets. But by doing so, they're limiting what the room might bring to the table. Sometimes they're limiting the creativity and the decision making and the chances the room might take had they not imposed that on them. So we always establish those agreements beforehand, especially with the CEOs, those that might used to be, they're used to being in control, or they're used to dictating the pace of the meeting. Those are things we talk about before I come in. There's none of that allowed. That you cannot deviate. And so I have agreements with some that I will ask you to leave if you deviate. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
100%.
a lot of it is
100%. And to your point, I think a lot of leaders are very calculated in what they do, right? So, and I mentioned to you earlier, prior to us hopping on this recording, that in some capacity, calculation is important, right? Doing research and trying to figure out where you want to navigate something to go. But often we need to be way more curious than calculated. I can't tell you how many conversations that I've been a part of where I really think that this conversation should go a certain direction, but then I can't force it that way, or it becomes mechanical, or the connection's not there. So I need to be more curious than that calculated. So you're absolutely right. I think a lot of leaders can learn from that in a big, big way. I do want to touch a little bit more on the writing piece, because I find this fascinating. I've spoken to a lot of people that I consider, wildly successful, and it's amazing that a lot of them have a habit of writing in the morning, whether it's journaling, whether it's writing for 5 minutes. I talked to a gentleman recently. He said every morning he writes for an hour, every single morning, an hour without fail. Will set a timer and does not stop until the timer goes off. I find that fascinating, right? So take us through your writing regimen. Is this pen to paper? Is this typing? Are you in a certain room of your house? Is there a certain goal in mind? So take us through a little bit more of that process.
I wish I could say there was a goal in mind. There's not a goal in mind. The goal in mind is just to let me back up. That's probably not true. I think the goal is just to be more aware and more present with what's going on in life. I want to capture my observations or my feelings towards things, even if they're ridiculous. And so the more I can understand what goes on inside myself and why I think this or why I thought that was important, the more I can pay attention to other people. If I understand my own quirks and nuances and opinions and judgments and all that, it makes me more present. So there's that. As far as the room, I usually go downstairs. I use my notes section. I'll go right down into the basement. We have a finished basement. And I just sit down there. I open my notes and I start typing. Sometimes I'll go right to LinkedIn and I'll type a quick story about, I was out to dinner with Matt the other night. And I might not use your name, but I might just say, we talked about this and he said that and I said this. And then I'll take that and try to figure out how does that apply to this scenario in a company, or what's really underneath that conversation that worked or didn't work. So a lot of it is just trying to understand the nature of communication between people. And, I'm a communication coach at its core, even though I coach execs and sales. At the end of the day, all I'm doing is trying to help people understand other people. That's it. Whether they're selling something or leading people or hiring people, it doesn't matter. It all comes back to understanding. And I think we're losing our way as people. We are not really paying attention to all the nuance of personalities and experiences and words and gestures and all the things that make up communication. I think we're missing out, especially when I talk to people that get hung up on what somebody says to them. And I look at it and say, well, most of us have a limited vocabulary. Reality is that. I mean, there's only so many people who have an expansive vocabulary. Most of us are stuck regurgitating the same basic words and phrases over and over again. We don't even think about what we're saying. So when I encounter somebody who's upset because Matt said this or they said that, they're at the mercy of their interpretation. They're at the mercy of that person's vocabulary. They're at the mercy of their judgments. And so a lot of my writing is trying to flesh that stuff out. And again, I don't know that, and some of it turns into a class. Some of it turns into a public talk. Some of it, I could come in and just be an observer in a room. And all of a sudden, when I have 20 minutes, I end up talking about something like that. And the client might think, wow, that's an awesome program. And it's not a program. It's a thought based on a writing that's based on a few fundamental observations. So again, that's kind of where my head goes. It's, you talked about musicians like Dylan and Sinatra. I was a huge Prince fan or a huge Tom Petty fan. Their volume of music is almost endless, like their library of unreleased recordings. And so we only saw a fragment of what they created. But a lot of what they were writing about were their daily observations and experiences. And some of it made sense and some of it didn't.
I appreciate you bringing up Prince. I recently toured Prince's house, which was wild, right? So he had a house with a recording studio. Highly recommend people check it out if you're in the it's in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota area. Awesome. Wild, right? And I found the home quite fascinating because, he had 200 guitars.
Yeah.
He had certain outfits, and part of the outfits were to spur on ideas and creativity. So talk about someone that was like unbelievably creative. It's absolutely wild. So I appreciate you bringing that. But I really want to dive a little bit deeper in the limited vocabulary piece because I think there's a lot there, and I don't want people to miss it. So I absolutely agree with you, right? Limited vocabulary. And sometimes our experiences dictate the vocabulary that we have, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between sympathy and empathy, right? To me, empathy, like you've literally been in a similar situation. Like you could feel the pain of what someone went through. And sometimes people they haven't had our experiences. So we can't condemn them. They're not less than us. They just haven't walked through maybe that hurtful, painful moment in life. So I think it's really important that we shouldn't beat ourselves up when someone says something or doesn't say something because they just don't know what we know. And we need to remind ourselves of that in a big, big way. So I appreciate you mentioned that. I do want to touch on just how you work with someone that might be rubbed the wrong way from a communication perspective. Like often in business, we talk about ROI all the time, right? What's the ROI? What's the ROI? And a lot of times there are major communication breakdowns in a company where people get pissed off at one another. There's strife. You're trying to get a team rowing in the same direction. You're trying to build a team dynamic. You're trying to continue to cultivate a great culture. But sometimes people get really hurt and they get really just angry about what someone says. So what do you do from, not that you're a counselor or anything for these people and you come in with like a counseling type background, but what do you try to do to get people back on the same page when there is maybe deep wounds regarding what someone might have said to them?
That's such a loaded question because every example is so unique unto itself. I'll give you one recurring theme that I see in quite frankly any client that I've ever worked with, and I think since I've been on my own, I've worked with 80 or so different companies. Some of them I've been working with the entire 12 years. One of the biggest, there's a lot of unspoken tension that lingers in any family, in any community, in any company. It doesn't matter, any country, town. There's unspoken tension that exists between people. And so when I go into an organization, for example, if you got offended that, Mary said this and now Matt's upset, it rarely has anything to do with what anybody said. It's generally tied back to something that was avoided, ignored, dismissed, mocked like 6 months or 6 years ago. And so the other thing that gets in the way is in a lot of companies, well-intentioned leaders have an open door policy, for example. And then if you have a problem or you have an idea or you want to talk about something, come to me. And that's where a lot of them trap themselves because they allow, say, the employee or the colleague to come in and maybe overshare about somebody else. And in those moments, some of the unsuspecting ones will go try to resolve the problem. Let me go talk to Matt, or let me go. And as soon as they do that, they fracture the other relationship. So you've got people in a conference room, for example, where somebody gets upset at somebody else theoretically about what they said, but really it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that I know you've been talking to so-and-so about me because they addressed me and you didn't. So that's just one example of the words, and what was said really has nothing to do with where the frustration comes from. The other thing, and I can give you a million examples, is the perception of what the relationship is going to be at the outset is one thing. Like in the hiring phase, there's kind of a romancing that goes on between, say, the hiring organization and the new employee. And they both want to believe the best in one another, that this is going to work, and we're going to get married, and we're going to live happily ever after. But it doesn't take long for all of that to get broken. So what does it feel like on the first day? I remember going to a company. I was hired by a company, and I spoke with both partners before I joined. I had known these guys for years. But what I didn't know is they didn't speak to one another until the very first day. I had no idea. So when I went in on my first day and I'm signing the paperwork with the managing partner, the head person, his other partner came in and walked right by the office and never said anything. I have known these guys for years, other than, hey, and he goes to his office, and I'm thinking, I just left a job after 13 years to come work here with you guys. I didn't know you didn't speak. And then, and that basically destroyed the relationship. I was there for 3.5 years, just about. I was never able to get beyond the fact that the main guy never acknowledged that he didn't speak to his partner. And I was naive enough not to ask. I just didn't think that was a problem. So that to me, what I thought I was walking into, as I'm signing the paperwork, I signed with total regret. And I made it work for 3.5 years. Now, was it a terrible experience? No, I learned a lot. Would I do it again there? No, absolutely not. I felt deceived before the game started. So I don't know if that's something you can relate to, or.
Oh, 100%. And what a great response. Thank you so much. Unspoken tension. I mean, how true is that? That happens so much, not only in business, but in families and neighborhoods. You mentioned communities. There's always this sense of unspoken tension. It's probably coming up on about a year, and I'm drawing a blank on the guest's name, but I had a guest share on a podcast, our perception of someone else's perception of us drives us crazy. Our perception of someone else's perception of us drives us crazy. Isn't that true? That goes back to what you said regarding unspoken tension. We think someone thinks in a certain way regarding us, or pick an experience, but yet we could be completely off base because we're not asking questions. Right. We're not trying to learn, right? So, how simple is it? Hey, I feel blank, or Dave, you said something and here's what my mind gravitated towards. Is that what you were trying to share? Give me more about that. Tell me more about that. It's so important. So I appreciate you mentioned that. I do want to go back a little bit in time. If I had a remote and I could hit the rewind button, because I'm really interested to know, how do people get to where they are in life? So if I hit rewind and I jump back to Dave's teenage years, right? And I were to ask 13-year-old Dave, what did you want to be? What did you want to do? What would the response have been?
At 13, oh man. I don't think I had any clue what I wanted to do. I do remember in 8th grade, I think it was 12. I do remember, when they would, the schools would have you take I don't know if it was a personality assessment or an interest assessment, and you would answer whatever 200 questions, and they would come back with results and say, well, you would be, your personality is designed to be an actor, and you're designed to be whatever. But I do remember that was actually one of the things listed is you could actually act. You could be on stage, or you might consider the television industry. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh man, I'm built to go do that. Now, did I do anything about it? No, not at all. I just liked knowing that this test thought that this is where my skills were aligned. But the reality is I had no idea how I wanted to spend my time. And the truth is, and I've said this a million times, I did not have a work ethic at that age. I was not a productive high school student. I was not a productive college student. I did not come from a confident family. We talk about unspoken tension. That's what we were raised in, either volatility or hiding from a problem. And so I learned like how not to be around people. And so I didn't have this game plan for my life, for my career. It was more survival mode. How do I get through today? How do I avoid that argument? Or how do I defend myself here? And I'm so thankful for those experiences. I was talking to somebody recently. I was actually talking to my dad recently. I'm like, I'm so thankful that we grew up in a dysfunctional home. And the reason, and I mean that because I'm at peace in chaos, and I'm at peace where there's just like you could cut the tension in a room because I'm used to that. And so it's not an uncomfortable place for me to be, even if it's uncomfortable for other people. And a lot of my clients leverage me to help them make it a little more tolerable so they can work through it. And had I not had those experiences as a kid, and quite frankly, I still come from a dysfunctional family. There's still all of this stuff that goes on. And I don't necessarily love that. That's my background. But at the same time, I was able to create an awesome family of my own and have communication and take these experiences and weave them into my career. And the reality is I never had a plan to do it. There was no plan to do it. It just kind of happened. I ended up majoring in communication at college without any intention of doing this. I didn't even know this was a job. So it just kind of all happened as a result of life experiences, working through stuff on my own, and then eventually getting a couple of jobs where I made it. And through those experiences, I developed skills and blah, 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 blah. I won't put you to sleep with the rest. But I wish I could tell you I had no plan, no discipline, no plan.
So when you mentioned dysfunctional family, just so you can kind of paint the scene for us, what were some of the reasons why you would have classified it as a dysfunctional family?
Well, a lot of it was either we came from, there was a lot of stuff that was not discussed. So there were a lot of things that, outside of my immediate family that might have taken place, grandparents, aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, the lifestyles, the choices, the behaviors, whether it was alcohol or abuse. Those things weren't discussed. We were always extracted from that. In the meantime, in our house, you didn't talk about anything that was challenging. It was just not, you don't talk about it. And the more you didn't talk about it, stuff would leak out. Where one parent might become incredibly abusive when they're challenged, another one would retreat. So instead of just dealing with whatever questions or challenges or about anything, it was either you had to submit to, we don't talk about that, or you're going to get hit, or we're going to ignore this, or I'm going to ignore you. So it was a constant. And parents, I look at all parents, including myself, you, whatever, we all do the best we can with the tools we've got. We're all a byproduct of whatever happened to us when we were children. And our parents are a byproduct of whatever happened to them, and our grandparents are byproduct. So when you talk about empathy and sympathy and all that stuff earlier, that's what I've learned over the years is, hey, you know what? You might not have made the right choices. You might have hurt some people. You might have had some things happen, but you're doing the best you can with the tools you have. And so that's what I mean by dysfunction is we never worked through anything. And yet I've learned to accept it and channel it and be okay with it. I talk to my dad all the time. Like he still has regrets about certain things. And I always say to him, like, Dad, I have no regrets. None. I think you did the best you could. And we're all in good shape. You did the best you could with the tools you had. And I wouldn't do it any differently. I wouldn't have my job or my family if I didn't learn these things. So I think it's good.
All right, so take me through this because I am very interested in this piece of your life. So you mentioned you weren't productive in high school, you weren't
Right.
very productive in college, but then you also said, all right, you had a dysfunctional family. Today, you were able to create an awesome family. You
Yeah.
had mentioned that you didn't really discuss much of what needed to be discussed as a family. Now you help people with communication.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of aspects of business. They could be very chaotic. You said that you find, you're peaceful, or you're at peace in the midst of chaos. So there had to have been a major change, whether it was gradually or whether it was a big aha moment in your life, to go from, your words, unproductive in high school and college, to make a major shift like that.
Yeah.
So was there a particular moment you can point back to, or an experience, or maybe like daily disciplines,
Yeah.
to get you to that point?
I don't want to, I'll never say it's one moment. I will say discipline had a ton to do with it. That came later. But I would say the first time, one thing I'll say is I've always been obsessively curious. So what I might have lacked at home, I was still curious about somebody else's parents. So if I went to somebody else's house and their mom or dad was friendly and they let me sit in the kitchen and talk to them, I would sit in the kitchen and talk to them. And it was always so amazing to me that an adult was interested or that allowed me to sit at a table. And that's just one example. I had friends who had really good parents, and I saw the good in other people. And sometimes those people saw my strength. And then as I started in school, certain teachers even outside of certain friends or colleagues or coworkers over the years would notice things in me that I did not see in myself. And if it wasn't for those parents or teachers or friends or colleagues or bosses over the years, it was a collection of people that would say things to me that I didn't, if it didn't register early. Like, I remember a friend, one of my buddies, I was out of work. I mean, I was working in the restaurant business. I remember calling him one night. I was so beside myself because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a college degree and all that. I remember him saying to me, you could be the president of the United States if you wanted to be. And I'm like, cut the crap. I'm not going to, this is, bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if you can edit that. And he's like, I'm not kidding you. He said, you're the one person in my life that you can say anything to anybody and get away with it. And people like it and they believe it. And I don't think you realize that about yourself. And then he was one of the first people to say that to me. And then I started having managers and colleagues and clients over the years. It was through those, like, people believing in me. Even when I started my own company, I was full of self-doubt. But I remember my father-in-law saying, well, I totally believe in you. I have no doubt this is gonna be a success. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm talking to him, what do you see that I don't see? I don't even know what I'm going to do. And so, like, for me, it was being curious enough about people outside of my house, and allowing them to get to know me and listening to them. And so if that makes any sense. And then on top of that, all of the discipline came as a result of, it started with me making a commitment to my health and wellness. And a lot of that just tied back to, I got to start working out. And once I committed to exercise, which was probably when I was 19, I've never stopped. That changed my life completely. It introduced me to daily discipline. And then that evolved into, then when I got into sales, I realized that without discipline, you can't succeed in sales. So I started applying similar disciplines to my sales career. But then in leadership, it was the same thing. Disciplined about being an effective communicator. Disciplined about getting ahead of problems. Disciplined about being proactive and following through, holding people accountable. It applies to everything in life. If you want to be successful at anything, you just have to reverse engineer down to, what are the one or two things I need to do every day consistently? Whether it's write, play music, lose weight, sell more, you've got to practice. You want to be good at anything? If you really want to be good at it, you got to practice it relentlessly and then learn to enjoy it. So that's where it came from, and it's a roundabout story. Not very specific, I realize, but I'm happy to expand on it if you want me to.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So you mentioned obsessively curious, and one of the things I found interesting when you said that, now this is well over a decade. I remember it might have even been maybe even pushing 15 years now. It's amazing how quickly time flies. But I remember there was one particular year where I said, I'm going to read as many biographies as I possibly can, and I'm going to try to look for reoccurring themes with these successful individuals. And
Yeah.
I tried to boil it down to five things. Now, again, it was a long time ago. I don't remember all the five things that were on the list, but I do remember two of them. One was obsession and one was curiosity, right? So, and pick a titan of industry. More than likely, they were obsessed and they had a high level of curiosity. That's why and how
Yeah.
they were able to position themselves to greatness. But the question I have for you, Dave, because you had mentioned obsession, right? And it is true. If you think of someone that's going to go down in history as successful in this one sphere of influence, they were very obsessed. Can obsession be taught? Does there need to be a big aha moment, something that happens that spurs on obsession? Is someone born obsessed? Are they in a situation, or are they in a maybe they're raised to be more obsessive? Can you teach someone how to be obsessed so that they can ascend to greatness?
I think anything can be taught. If somebody wants to learn and wants to be taught and wants to create, it's possible. And I think everybody's experiences are so different. There are some people who go through major life events, and that major life event is what sparked, say, the obsession. Maybe they lost a parent at a young age, or maybe they had a disability and were never able to walk, or whatever it is, and they build their life around that thing. But on the flip side, I have a client who fundamentally believes that people are people and you can't develop them. And I fundamentally don't believe that. I believe that you can develop anybody that is committed and wants to be developed. If you're willing to put in the time, I believe you can move the needle on anybody. And so obsession to me comes from, like, it's a combination of things. One is, are you curious enough to keep trying? Are you committed enough to do it consistently? And then all of a sudden you go from curious and committed to the flywheel starts spinning. It's like when you're learning to throw or catch or do anything for the first time, there's an awkwardness to it until it's not awkward. If you swing a golf club enough, eventually the ball goes straight. Might take years, but eventually the ball goes where you're hitting it. But you might swing 100 times and feel like you're just never going to be able to get it until you get it. And so to me, obsession, addiction, and this is where I think we all have to be conscious, is I look at anything and say, I know that if I commit to something and choose to do it consistently over time, within a certain period, I'm going to want to do it. And once I want to do it, that's when the curiosity escalates. That's when the obsession escalates. And that's what people have to manage. You don't want to become an addict to even a healthy habit. You have to be aware of it. But I do think that we can train ourselves to do things unconsciously, and you can love them unconsciously, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so you mentioned consistency. I want to talk a little bit about that because I feel like we live in a culture that loves intensity, right? And if I were to say I'm going to lose 50 pounds this year, I mean that's wow, right? I mean that's intense. But if I were to say to you, you know what, I'm going to be under a certain amount of calories every single day, like, oh, that's a bore, right? But me being under a certain amount of calories, being in a calorie deficit, is going to lead to losing weight. So, what would you recommend recommend to someone that's struggling with consistency? What would you recommend them to do or think about or inspire or motivate themselves in order to keep on so that they could reach a certain goal? They could potentially reach the level of obsession so they can get to achieving something.
Well, you know as well as I, you're in the storytelling business, and you probably help companies tell stories about themselves. And part of that probably ties back to why is it that you exist as an organization? What is it that you're doing to potentially help your clients solve problems, grow, do whatever it is why do you do that? And so there's got to be a reason, like a guiding light, a goal or an objective or a mission or a purpose or whatever you want to call it. that gives you the reason to do anything. So I think the first thing is if you say you want it, well, let's talk about that. Why is it that you want to lose weight? Like a lot of people want to lose weight because their neighbor looks better than them, or they want to be tan because this one looks better. Who cares? It's what's your real reason? Like I take it and I say, life can be sliced into probably 8 to 10 categories, but let's just take health. Do you want to be healthy or do you want to weigh a certain weight? At the end of the day, if you lose 50 pounds, 50 pounds and you're unhealthy and exhausted, or is 42 okay, feeling great? Like, what are you trying to do? What's the number really mean? Is the scale even accurate? Would anyone know the difference between 50 and 42? What if your attitude sucks at 50? So you follow what I'm saying? So I look at it and say, what is it that you really want? Do you want health or do you want weight? Do you want money or do you want comfort? Do you want to be married or do you want to be happy? Like you can be married and hate the person you're married to. You know what I'm saying? You could have a family and feel completely underwater trying to support them. So it's like, what I want to be a perfect mom. I want to be a perfect dad. Well, some parents believe that's that's what they owe their kids. And then they go overboard doing for their kids. So they create dependency in their kids, and then that taxes their marriage. So I look at it and say, what is it that you think you really want and why? And then if that's really what you want, have you thought about a way to simplify the way to get there? Because happiness is not in the achievement of the goal. You know this. It's in the process of maybe never getting there. Like it's the process of just always trying to be a little healthier. It's the process of being just a little bit more curious. It's not about knowing. It's about trying to understand. So like for me, it's never about the destination. I mean, I talk to companies all the time and they've got their revenue goals and their gross profit goals and all the scalability goals. It's like, yeah, no, I get it. But you're not, if you really wanted that stuff, then you would do these things consistently. Is that what you really want? Or are you just telling a story to get your employees to do more? Look, what is it that you're doing this for? Is it because the opportunity is really there? In some cases, that is what's going on. But I look at it and say, again, I'm off on a tangent. I'm a very tangential speaker. Is deciding what is it that you think you want, and are you willing to do a few things each day to get there, even if it takes a little extra time? Because ultimately, that repetition is what sparks all sorts of the hormones in your body to just make it like an automatic thing. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is you can actually trigger your brain to just get you there, where it becomes a physical part of you. And I don't have to get into it. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, great points. No, I really, really appreciate that. And Dave, I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate your time, everything that you shared, a lot of high value. There's 3 things in particular that I'm going to remember from our conversation. So the first thing is I really appreciate you speaking about limited vocabulary. I think there's a lot of layers with that. And you had talked about unspoken tension as well. It's something for all of us to think about is that when someone is sharing something with us, they may not have the vocabulary we have. And there could be unspoken tension with what's being said, right? There's multiple layers under the surface with that. A second thing that you said, and it wasn't anything in particular, but it's just something that I think it's motivating in a sense. And I think that it's something that we can all, like it's a success story, right? So, and I appreciate your vulnerability with it. You mentioned being in a dysfunctional home, and then yet you were able to turn the page and have an awesome family that you have today. Not everyone can say that, unfortunately. Some people think that they're beholden to their past. So I appreciate, you being vulnerable with us, sharing that with us. And the third and final piece is you saying obsessively curious. And I would challenge everyone listening to really think about, are you obsessed enough to hit the goal that you want? And are you curious enough, or are you just so calculated you don't allow for that curiosity and creativity? So I appreciate all those points. Dave, if someone wants to get more information on you, what you do, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
I tell everybody, go to LinkedIn, connect with me, send me a note. Happy to build a relationship with you. That's the best way to get me.
Perfect. I'll include that in the show notes to your LinkedIn account. People can just click and go from there. Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate your time.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a review, since positive reviews help others find these conversations. New episodes drop regularly, so stay tuned. And remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to take action, you must share more stories.